Senator Wells.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Honourable Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Wells, seconded by the Honourable Senator Seidman, that the bill be read a second time. On debate, Senator Wells.
Thank you, Speaker. Honourable colleagues, I rise today to speak to Bill C-218, the Safe and Regulated Sports Betting Act, and to serve as the Senate sponsor. I would like to thank Kevin Waugh, Member of Parliament for Saskatoon-Grasswood, for his leadership with this bill, which seeks to regulate sports betting in Canada, strengthen consumer protections to ensure the safety of those participating, and bring revenues and tax dollars inside our borders to invest back into our communities. Sports betting has been legal in Canada for over 3 decades, in fact, since 1985. Outside of horse racing, however, there is only one form of legal sports betting in Canada. It's called parlay bets. This type of betting requires an individual to bet on 2 or more games, and in order to receive a payout, each individual bet has to be correct. For example, if a bettor were to bet on the outcomes of an NHL game, an NFL game, and an NBA game, these would be bundled together in one parlay, and the bettor would only receive a payout if the outcomes of all 3 games are successfully wagered. The system of legal parlay betting generates approximately $500 million of annual betting expenditures in Canada. Single-event sports betting is currently prohibited in Canada. This means that if a Canadian wanted to bet $10 on their favourite hockey team or any other sports team, that would be illegal. For Canadians that legally gamble, by law, they must participate in more gambling than they may wish by making them bet on multiple games, where the odds are stacked against them, as it is more difficult to ever see a payout when betting on multiple games. Yet that is what Canadian law, as it stands now, mandates. Given that single-event sports betting is not legal in Canada, it may be surprising to hear that Canadians are spending about $14 billion annually on this very product, which is 28 times what they're spending on legal multi-match bets. This enormous industry of illegal activity has been made possible through both web-based offshore gambling sites and organized crime groups. In 2019, Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, a federal agency, released its public report on organized crime, which provided an overview of the Canadian criminal landscape and the activities of organized crime groups that operate within it. It outlined that Canada's legal gaming market is controlled by organized crime groups, particularly outlaw motorcycle gangs, and traditional mafia-structured organized crime groups. It goes on to explain that the criminal groups operating these gaming networks, quote, often try to circumvent Canadian law by running their websites on offshore servers, close quote, and they use, open quote, violence, extortion, and intimidation to further their criminal goals, close quote. In terms of where the revenue is going, the report states that these groups use these illicit funds to finance other forms of criminality, such as drug smuggling and trafficking. Colleagues, it's not difficult to visualize the severity of harm that is possible with billions of dollars going into the wrong hands every single year. Betting taking place through offshore sites and organized crime groups goes entirely unregulated. This puts Canadians at risk. Unsurprisingly, these groups have no interest in consumer protections or safeguards. There is no emphasis on problem gambling, addictions, or mental health issues. In fact, the exacerbation of these issues is to their benefit. The passage of this bill would allow for provincial governments to finally start regulating single-event sports betting. In 1985, the federal and provincial governments came to an agreement about how gaming would be managed, and it was agreed that the federal government would refrain from re-entering the field of gaming and betting and, quote, ensure that the rights of the provinces in that field are not reduced or restricted, close quote. Since then, the provincial governments have developed and fine-tuned, well-regulated, responsible gaming practices and frameworks with strong operational controls and rules to ensure the integrity of the sports betting products offered and the safety of consumers participating. In my province of Newfoundland and Labrador, this is done through a partnership with our Atlantic Canadian provincial partners under the auspices of the Atlantic Lottery Corporation, known as ALC, where profits are shared based on a proportional basis according to what is spent on lotteries in each province. 100% of ALC's profits stay in the region to help fund services essential to Atlantic Canadians like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Colleagues, if this bill passes, these stringent provincial regulations, frameworks, and consumer protections would all apply to single-event sports betting, and the product would be brought safely into the well-regulated light of day. The regulations that would be put in place around single-event sports betting are significant, tangible, and desperately needed. Some examples are age and identity verification to ensure minors cannot participate, information and data sharing between sports organizations, sports book operators, gaming regulators, and law enforcement to protect the integrity of matches and prevent match fixing. Prohibition on players, coaches, and officials from wagering on sports. Standards for advertising, marketing, and the offering of odds. Access to responsible gambling tools and self-exclusion options such as weekly deposit limits, wager limits, session time limits, 24-hour take-a-break, or even self-exclude whereby they can voluntarily prohibit themselves from online play for 6, 12, 24, or 36 months. In addition, colleagues, Atlantic Lottery Corporation has launched an industry-leading online responsible gaming tool called PlayWise Rating. This tool provides players with a confidential personal play rating at the behavioral level to help them understand their play and how it is evolving over time. These safeguards are necessary to protect Canadians. However, they can only be implemented once single-event sports betting is no longer prohibited by the Criminal Code. It's also important to note that our provincial governments have been seeking this for more than a decade. The first provincial government request for this change was in 2009, and support has only grown since. The provincial governments stand in support of this bill, and just recently, Ontario's Attorney General and Minister of Finance co-signed a letter to the Senate expressing the province of Ontario's support for, quote, the timely passage of Bill C-218 to help provinces in their efforts to provide legitimate and competitive gaming markets that protect Canadian consumers, close quote. The letter states the provincial government's belief that, quote, broader legislation with a robust regulatory framework will create safe online gaming environment that is responsive to consumer choice while providing responsible gaming and consumer protection measures, close quote. I've received a similar letter from the Atlantic Lottery Corporation, again representing the 4 Atlantic provinces. Currently, due to the underground nature of single-event sports betting operations, no taxes are being collected on this product, despite the $14 billion being spent annually by Canadians. This results in a situation in which Canadians are completely unprotected. They are first placing bets through systems that are easy to access but entirely unregulated. With no consumer protections in place and the absence of tax revenues results in an underinvestment in programming that would provide support with problem gambling, addiction, and mental health challenges. In February, PricewaterhouseCoopers conducted a study on the potential economic impacts of this bill if it were to pass. It concluded that, in a high-growth scenario, sports betting revenues would increase by 900% within 2 years, from $241.7 million to over $2.4 billion. This rise in legal and taxable earnings would result in an associated increase in Canada's total annual tax revenue of $509.5 million, in addition to the regular gaming profits that are distributed to provincial treasuries. Colleagues, imagine the impact of these revenues every single year. The increased revenues could also be directed towards addiction research, youth sport programming, healthcare, and education. The economic impacts of this bill would extend even beyond the increase in tax revenue and the investments in communities that would become possible. The PricewaterhouseCoopers report also found that within 2 years, almost 2,700 additional jobs, will be created across Canada. This complements research from the Canadian Gaming Association, which shows that the average salary within Canada's gaming industry is over $65,000 a year. It is clear, colleagues, that this bill seeks to dry up revenue streams going to organized crime and operators of the offshore sites and redirect these streams to Canadians. Many of Canada's Indigenous communities have been calling for loosened restrictions on single-event sports betting. Just as this bill was coming to the Senate, the Saskatchewan Indian Gaming Authority, also known as SIGA, sent a letter to the Senate in support of the bill. SIGA, a non-profit organization that contributes 100% of its net income back to surrounding communities, namely Saskatchewan's First Nations, the province of Saskatchewan, and community development corporations, through the operation of legal casinos, the organization has created employment for 1,800 individuals, of which 65% are First Nations. SIGA's letter states that only one tool that will greatly help the gaming industry recover going forward is the approval of single-event wagering. It continues in their letter, SIGA casinos, like other operators in Canada, make significant contributions to the economy, and we simply want the opportunity to compete and offer a product demanded by our customers. We currently see the unregulated grey market conducting business in our province with no benefit back to our stakeholders. Close quote. The letter also touches on the importance of consumer protections by stating, approving single-event sports betting also protects the interests of our customers. We are always making sure our customers are well informed on the games we offer and the integrity of the games is protected. As a legal operator, we are held to high standards of accountability in areas such as industry regulation, responsible gaming, and the protection of financial transactions. Close quote. It is clear, colleagues, that they simply want a level playing field. We must also consider how Canada's prohibition on single-event sports betting is affecting our border communities. In 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned a 1992 federal law in the U.S. that prohibited sports betting, and it is now up to individual states to decide whether to legalize it. At this point, almost every U.S. state has either legalized single-event sports betting or has active legislation seeking to do so. The list includes most of our border state neighbors. New York, Michigan, Montana, and Pennsylvania have all legalized single sport betting. This threatens border communities like Niagara Falls, Windsor, and others as tourists and locals opt to go across the border to participate in legal gaming and betting. It was one thing when the main alternative to Canada's legal gaming industry was the black market. But now, for many communities, an alternative that offers single-event sport betting is as simple as a 15-minute drive away. Colleagues, there's a reason this bill has widespread support from credible stakeholders. In 2020, the NBA, NHL, MLB, MLS, and the CFL put out a joint statement in support of Canada making this change, which stated that, quote, regulating single-game betting would allow for strong consumer protections as well as safeguard to further protect the integrity of sports. Close quote. This has been supported by provincial governments, labour groups such as Unifor and the Canadian Labour Congress, business organizations such as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and numerous provincial and community chambers, law enforcement, mayors, and other community leaders across the country, including provincial and regional lottery corporations, many Indigenous communities, the Responsible Gambling Council, the International Olympic Committee, and the Canadian Olympic Committee. This broad support is indicative of the quality of this bill. The bottom line is that its passage would do so much good for Canadians and for Canada. I've discussed the numerous communities, groups, associations, and individuals who are supportive of this bill. But I also think we have to ask ourselves, colleagues, who would not want this bill to pass? Criminal organizations that are illegally and unethically profiting from Canadians with little or no regard for regulations, consumer protection, problem gambling, or mental health. would clearly not support this bill, as it seeks to strip them of billions of dollars per year that they're using to fund other illegal activities. Offshore gambling sites operate outside the purview of Canadian law. They would not be supportive either. We must take this back from the black and grey markets and bring it into the light. Colleagues, this is a bill that we should all support. A vote against it would not be a vote against gambling. It would be a vote against increased safeguards, regulations, and community programming. We have an opportunity to responsibly regulate gaming and gambling in Canada and to ensure that Canadians already participating in single-event sports betting have supports and safeguards in place to do so safely. We also have an opportunity to ensure that hundreds of millions of dollars are being annually invested back into our communities. Thank you, colleagues.